Hey guys, this is Dave with Gazaudio, and this is the Matrix Audio Element P2 Power Amplifier. And if you happened to watch my recent review of the Element M2 Streaming DAC / headphone amplifier, while I did feel like the M2 integrated very well with my desktop setup and it offered excellent performance as a desktop headphone amplifier, I actually felt like it functioned best for me when integrated in with my main home audio system. And then now, with the addition of the Element P2 to that system, not only do I have a complete, very versatile system that offers lots of inputs and outputs, including XLR inputs and outputs, HDMI ARC functionality, wireless high-resolution streaming that can be integrated in with my Roon system and can completely be controlled with the Matrix Audio app. Now, with the addition of the Element P2 Power Amplifier, it completes the picture and it brings that final necessary component. Power. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. Now, as far as what's included in the box, you basically get just the P2 and then a power cable. And then, of course, you get the quick start guide and then the warranty card, but that's it. Now, as far as pricing, this is going to set you back about $1,580, which I know isn't cheap. However, if you're in the home audio hobby, you'll know that compared to more high-end or the ultra high-end components, this could actually be considered to be quite affordable. Again, relatively speaking, and this is something I talk about all the time, and I brought this up in the Element M2 review as well, and I think even the K19 review, but there are reasons these types of devices cost more money, and generally you have to not only take into consideration the features, specifications, materials, internal components, the structural engineering as far as the housing itself, there's also the cost that goes into the initial R&D that you're paying for as well. In any case, as far as the build and construction of the P2, it's very similar to the M2 and also the X2, which is Matrix Audio's other high-end streamer DAC. But the structure is very, very solid, and it's very elegant and simple, which I love as far as the design. It just fits the aesthetics of my living room very well. And again, when it's paired with the M2, it just looks very clean and minimal. Speaking of minimal, as you can see, there's only one button on the front, and that is the power button. And what's funny is that button does not even get used because it also has a trigger input and output on the back, and it's receiving a signal from my M2 via a 3.5 millimeter cable. So when I turn the M2 on with the remote or the app, it automatically turns the P2 on as well, which is very convenient. And then on the front, we also have an LED power indicator light. And then as far as the rest of the connections on the back, we have a mono XLR input, stereo left and right, RCA and balanced XLR inputs, and I'm using the M2's balanced XLR outs to the P2's XLR inputs with my setup. Next to those is a small switch that allows you to switch between the 3 input modes. So if you're using it as a mono amp and are using the mono XLR input, then you would select the mono option. And then if you're using it in stereo mode, then you would just select which stereo inputs you are using either the RCAs or the XLRs. We then have our stereo speaker terminals, and you can see that you have both stereo and mono connection options depending on which configuration you choose. And I should also point out that these speaker connectors are the WBT0708CU connectors, which have a hollow design, and they also use gold plating over a pure copper on the conductors, which just shows that Matrix Audio is paying close attention to those little details. And another thing, or detail I should point out, is that the P2 on the bottom, it uses CBVB pads, which use a combination of small ceramic balls and silicone to minimize vibration. But then going back to the back of the P2, there is then a Type-C input, which is exclusively for firmware updates, and then the trigger input and output, and then finally the DC input. Now, I quickly want to just acknowledge here that obviously if you are looking to build a system using less components, then an alternative would be to use an integrated amplifier, because that's going to give you amplification, obviously, but it's also going to include a built-in DAC with all of your digital input and wireless options and maybe some other features. So something like my CX-A81 or 61, the RCAM A25, and also the Marantz 70S, that's probably the best bang for your buck, the 70S, for $1,000. And those all work and sound great. And again, they combine a lot of features into one unit. However, if I'm being honest, if you have the space, then my recommendation is to go with separate components, because you have more flexibility as far as being able to interchange DACs, preamps, and other components if you choose to do so. So just some things to take under consideration. Now, getting into the rest of the specifications. So as I had mentioned a moment ago, you have the option of configuring the Element P2 a couple of different ways, either as a stereo amplifier, so one amplifier powering two speakers, or as a mono amplifier, so one amplifier per speaker. Now, in your standard 2-channel stereo configuration, the P2 is going to give you 110 watts per channel with an 8 ohm load, and then 230 watts per channel with a 4 ohm load. And then in mono mode, that power jumps up to 500 watts with an 8 ohm load, and then 850 watts with a 4 ohm load. So that's a pretty impressive amount of power considering the P2's size. Now, speaking of size, this is a Class D amplifier, and that is one of the benefits of a Class D, is that you can build them smaller. So if you are a little tight on space, or if you're looking for something that could even maybe fit on your desktop, depending on your desk size, then this could be a good solution. And then of course, other benefits of Class D amplifiers is that they are more energy efficient and they produce less heat than other classes. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the sound. So I guess a good place to start would be applications. So what type of applications are these amplifiers best suited for? Well, for my purpose, I'm using it mainly to power my bookshelf or stand mount speakers. Although it would probably have no problem driving a smaller pair of even floor standing speakers. And then of course, if you had a pair of these running them in mono mode, you could potentially go up to some larger speakers. But with both of my setups, a single P2 is plenty. So I've got two setups I've been kind of going back and forth between. I have my main listening room, where I also have my Element M2 set up, and I'm currently using the P2 to power a pair of Martin Logan Motion XT B100s, and then I also have a pair of SVS 3000 micro subs to kind of fill in the low end. And the XT B100s have a 4 ohm impedance with a sensitivity of 93 dBs. So with those putting that 4 ohm load on the P2, it's going to be increasing its power output up to 230 watts per channel. That's plenty of power for the XTB100s. And then I have this office/studio, which I'm currently using a pair of KEF LS50 Metas, which are an 8 ohm speaker. And then I also paired the P2 with my KEF R300s as well, which those are an 8 ohm speaker. And again, with an 8 ohm load, the P2 is going to be giving you 110 watts per channel. So in terms of drivability and pairing, the Element P2 pairs very well with all of those speakers, and it has absolutely no problem driving all of them. So I'm getting way more than enough volume, but more importantly, it's also giving me a neutral and linear presentation. And again, using the M2 as my source or the Mini i4, I know I'm going to be able to maintain that linear presentation with both components. Now, that's not to say this combination sounds sterile or clinical, because it is still giving me a nice sense of musicality, and it's still staying true to the natural reproduction of vocals and instruments. And that naturalness carries pretty consistently throughout the entire frequency spectrum. And if we work our way through the frequencies, starting with the bass notes have really good tactility. They're snappy, they're tight, and they maintain really good naturalness, but they also sound controlled and very incisive. And the mid-range is also doing an excellent job in portraying vocals and instruments naturally, while also delivering nice amounts of textures. The notes have good weight, and while I wouldn't necessarily categorize the P2 as having a rich presentation, I do feel like vocals and instruments are rich enough as to not come across as thin or light sounding. And then that naturalness also carries through nicely into the treble as well. So cymbal strikes, while maintaining good energy, never sound harsh or peaky, and all of the notes seem to be resolving properly. Detail levels are also pretty impressive. And while I know this isn't necessarily going to give me ultra high-end detail levels, and neither are any of my speakers, I do feel like it's pushing my speakers nearly to their max or peak levels as far as their detail rendering capabilities. Now, as far as soundstage imaging and layering, again, obviously my speakers, while being high performers for their price points, are not going to produce ultra high-end levels of technical performance. And that same thing applies to my other components as well. That being said, the P2 paired with my Martin Logan XTB100s, they're giving me really impressive amounts of detail and soundstage depth. And they are a little brighter as far as their treble presentation, especially when compared with my R300s. And that does, of course, give it a little more of a sense of perceived detail. But the things that always impress me with the XTB100s are its soundstage depth and instrument layering. And the P2, I feel, is really allowing the XTB100s to open up and deliver that nice sense of width and that nice amount of forward depth I like to hear. I do wish those speakers had more bass, but otherwise it's a great speaker for this price point, and they pair really well with the P2. And then of course I also paired the P2 with my LS50 Metas. And one of the things that makes, I guess, the Meta sort of a standout within its price range is not only just how well it measures, but how well it produces and how naturally it produces vocals and instruments, and also its imaging. It's simply remarkable. It's just a dual concentric design done very well. And it's just a very coherent speaker. And while I wouldn't necessarily consider it a hard to drive speaker, in my experience, it does respond better to more power. And the P2 only further confirmed that for me. And I don't know if I would say this is the best pairing as far as amplification that I've heard with the LS50 Metas, but it's darn close. And I can tell you that nearly all of the LS50 Metas strengths are revealed when paired with the Element P2. It just sounds really natural. And again, the instrument imaging is really focused and just almost spot on. And then finally, I also paired the P2 with the KEF R300s, which are an older speaker, but I've held on to them because while they do have their limitations as far as cohesiveness, and also like many stand mount sets don't have great bass extension, what they do have is an impressively large soundstage and really good imaging. And even though it doesn't have great bass extension, I would say that the bass dynamics are good as far as the mid bass punch. I'm just not sure the bass is integrated as well as some other newer sets I've heard. But all that said, the P2 paired beautifully with the R300s. As a matter of fact, this pairing, the P2 with the R300s, is probably as good as any pairing I've ever tried with the R300s. And that's not to say there may not be other excellent pairings out there, but this is no doubt one of the best pairings I've heard with the R300. But the bottom line is, when I paired the P2 with all of those speakers, it did a very, very good job. So I guess in conclusion, I would describe my experience with the Element P2 as being very good, because not only is it giving me what I want as far as versatility, so it's small enough to put in here on my desk in my studio, but it also fits nicely in my entertainment center, and it also fits the aesthetics of both of those spaces, my studio and my living room. And by the way, I failed to mention in my studio in here, I also paired this with the Matrix Mini i4, and that was a great pairing as well. In any case, in both scenarios, in my studio and in my main living space, the P2 in combination with the M2 and the Mini i4 functioned as I needed it to, as far as me being able to control the M2 and the Mini i4 with the app, and then stream all of my music services, so Roon, Qobuz, wirelessly, and also connect it to my CD player and to my TV. So the P2 M2 Mini i4 setup works very well for me. It gives me, again, all of the control that I need. It looks very elegant. It fits in all of those spaces very well. But that's not even the best part. What really impressed me about the Element P2 was it was able to provide the thing I wanted and needed most. And that is a nice amount of clean power, but also the internal components, the structural integrity as far as the housing, and the sound engineering to back that power up. Now again, is this thing going to be the best option out there? It could be. It depends on your needs. There are some great integrated options out there that combine all of that into one device. But if you are wanting to kind of go a little deeper into the hobby and start experimenting with separate components, again, while there are lots of options out there, I can tell you, based on my experience, that the P2 is a very, very solid power amplifier for this price point. So that concludes my review of the Matrix Audio Element P2. If you are new to the Gazaudio channel and you like our content, please take a second and hit that subscribe button. And if you'd like to go a step further, you can also support us through our Patreon. I'll be sure and leave a link in the description. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this video. Please comment on this video. Please share this video. Please like this video. I hope you have an awesome day.